Okay, everyone, let's get started. Okay, so thank you for coming to the Resilience Tech Report. If you're in the wrong whatever, it's okay, exit. But if you're here for that reason, welcome. Yeah, it's for you. It's for you. For you. And for you too. And this is experimental content. So if there's anything wrong, I apologize in advance. Untested. I may have too much, and I like to stop at the right time. So I will stop then abruptly. I apologize because I like time. You can ask a question in your app, and it'll appear here. So I can also stop and go to your question, because there's this paradigm called non-interactive video. We can watch me, blah, blah, blah. If you want a question answered, we can do it that way. Okay, ready? Was that, everyone accept the EULA? And click? Ooh, click. Okay, good. All right. So the Resilience Tech Report uses calligraphy designed by Cavalli Tsui. I always love ambigrams. Since the 80s, I love ambigrams. Ambigrams are things you flip around or you do symmetry. So this ambigram reads adversity, or if you flip it, it reads resilience. It's pretty cool, huh? So let's applause for Cavalli, please, out there. Cavalli did this. I found her on the internet. Incredible calligrapher. Okay. And what is this thing I'm doing? It's like an album I try to release every year of random stuff that I learned that year. That I try to kind of congeal it a bit. That sounds gross. But attempt to kind of make sense of what happened. And this report is about resilience. And it comes in 5 parts. The first part is called design and resilience. Some of you who are from the design world will kind of smell that and smell, oh, this smells correct. The second section is called resilience to change. This is a kind of a aha I've had recently, that design is a powerful mechanism to enable more humans to accept change. It's a special skill. And number 3, resilience and mattering. You know, mattering, this word, it's a wonderful word that means you matter. Feels good, doesn't it? You matter. I was like, oh, I feel much better. So there's something there important, restorative. There's a business of resilience, which I am in. I am at a company called Everbridge. I'm the Chief Technology Officer, where this is what I think about all the time, businesses and resilience. And adversities, trending, bad stuff happening. And the reason why I switched careers is because I realized that so many bad things were happening, and I was very fearful. And I thought the best way to be less fearful would to be learn everything I fear. So this presentation is about how many kind of ways you can die, how all kind of bad things happen. So I want to caution, if this isn't your thing, you probably should do the thing where it's okay if you get up during the thing. It's dark, but it's also trying to find kind of the light part of it too. Okay? Okay? I'm good. All right, I'm good. Okay. So design and resilience. And again, this will be available on PDF once I can upload it tonight or tomorrow, so you can read it if you want. But I remember when I was into this design thing for the first time, I kept hearing about form and function. Who knows form and function? Oh my gosh, so confusing, right? Form, function. I was like, what's that mean? And so I spent decades trying to understand it. And for those of you who know this, it's obvious to you, but function is what it does, and form is what you sense. Wait, important moment. Yves Behar. Where's Yves Behar? Yves Behar. Can you say that? Yves Behar, one of the greatest designers in the world, is here. Yves Behar, please. Don't sell my book, sell his book. Form and function. But matching form and function together is what design achieves. It's just like click. Oh my gosh, the function of the form. Is it form or function? I don't know. Connecting the two together. And I've been thinking a lot about how that was a good idea until technology happened. So you know this like a micro SIM, the micro RAM card, micro SD card. This is from 2005. It's 128 megabytes. And you're like, oh, 120 megabytes. Back then, that was an incredible amount of memory. You remember that. It's like, what? That much in there? But this thing called the fourth industrial revolution has happened. We're in that fourth industrial revolution. Not steam power, not electricity power, not desktop computers. We're in this sort of mobile, altered reality where the cloud exists, it's super complex, and it's kind of amazing. And what has happened is that everything changes very quickly during the fourth industrial revolution. It changes at the speed, at the exponential speed, not a linear speed. It's completely unnatural. So consider how in 2014, this is a micro SD card that had 128 gigabytes. If you notice, it looks exactly the same. It just went from M to G. M to G was 1,000 times. That's like in 9 years. That's not normal. So that abnormal effect is in place. That's why design has changed so much. It's changed from being physically based to organizationally based to computationally based. And I remember when I was talking about computational design, no one understood what I was talking about. So I spent 6 years writing this dumb book. And after writing, I was like, oh, this is what that is. So if you're wondering what that red thing is, it was an attempt to understand AI machine learning in more common terms. So you'll see me stumbling through to understand, like, is this what the computational design is? And by understanding it, I began realizing that it's actually not about design per se, but it's about change. So the physical world, the organizational world has changed. The computational world has changed. And so when it doesn't change, everyone's pretty happy. It's like, oh my gosh, this is okay. Every day is the same. It's amazing. But when change happens, you get into that mode of like, oh my gosh, change happened. And when change happens, you have 3 directions. One is like, didn't hurt me. The other one is, oh my gosh, shock. The other one is like, you get hurt. And so these 2 latter cases are where you have to struggle, you meet adversity, and the question is, can you bounce back? Now, when you think about this bounce back thing, I went back in history to understand where the heck the word resilience came from. It turns out that in 1627, this is the earliest found example of it, resilience meant to bounce back, like a ball you throw and it bounces back. I like to say, someone's at a party and says, oh, you're so resilient. You bounced back. And then 1857, it was used to describe the Scots and their hardiness. Is there any Scots here? Scots here? I know you Scots are super hardy. It wasn't just like bouncing back. It was about bouncing back and transformed. So it meant at a party you're saying, uh-oh, you're resilient. So it took on a different meaning. It's an important meaning, important difference. So when you think about this adversity we all know quite easily, it made us into people who want to fight it instead. It made us resilient in that we are transformed. We can mask up, non-mask up. We can find ways to sort of exist in this different world. So instead of flight, when something bad happens, flight, amygdala, oh, run. It was fight. And that fight difference is very different. So that's why, in many senses, I became interested in this notion of adversity and resilience, is that you don't become resilient unless you encounter adversity, which is a terrible thing to wish upon anyone. But it is a definition of how this resilience game works. So a summary of section 1. Function and form overlap, design magic occurring. And then what happens is, in this alternative world of a human world, there's this fear thing that happens. When fear happens, you have 2 directions. You go flight or you go fight. And depending upon, oftentimes, your level of privilege as well, you can choose to fight. If you are not able to do so, you better run flight. So it's a different inversion of design in some sense. Okay, section 2. Time, good. Okay, this is about change. How many of you are students of change? Raise your hand. Change, right? Change. This happens all the time, and if you cannot manage it, it can be super stressful. So I find that most people who are students of change, it's very healthy because bad stuff and good stuff happens all the time. And how you're able to respond to that, how you're resilient and can you respond to it and adapt is super important. So let's talk about design again. So this is something I've carried for maybe 10 years, and I finally understood like 2 weeks ago. Okay, and I was online, and there were like a bunch of people like, oh, I knew that already. So again, apologies. No idea is new. So this is a 2x2. One axis is novelty, freshness, and the other axis is familiarity. Oh, I know that. Low, high, low, high. So let's talk about this quadrant. This quadrant is where your low familiarity, low novelty. Low familiarity says, I'm so confused. Low novelty says, this is boring. Obviously, designers don't work in that quadrant because there's no one to buy your stuff if that's where you are. And then up here in this quadrant, you have high familiarity, low novelty. The high familiarity says, I know how to do this. I've used a hammer before. This is like a hammer. I can figure this out. But it has low novelty. It's like, this is boring. This is just a hammer. But it has a positive valence when it's for someone who's in a rush. I don't like surprises right now. I want the hammer to work like a hammer. So great design lives in this quadrant. If you flip to the other quadrant, over there, that quadrant is a quadrant of high novelty, low familiarity. So of course, because that's high novelty, it's like, wow, I've never seen that before. But then for someone who likes familiarity, they're like aghast. Like, oh, I'm so confused. Or it could also be a different reaction. I love dissonance. I love this when this happens. It actually sparks my imagination. So this quadrant here is commonly called in the marketing world the early adopter sort of space, like never, and it has to cross the chasm, but it's a real space, right? Okay, this quadrant is the best quadrant ever. This quadrant is high familiarity, high novelty. I want to pause for a second. That feels like a paradox in a way. How are you high familiarity, high novelty? It's where a person says, I could do this, and they're also saying, oh my gosh, amazing. It's like a real sweet spot. And this sweet spot is where many products and services, many consumers now expect you to be, but those who make them know how hard that really is. Okay, following so far? Good, good. Okay, that's the hardest slide I have on my deck. Okay, let's talk about change. This is a model that describes change. It's called the Kubler-Ross model. I found this 3 years ago, and it's been transformative. I found that when you're working with organizations of any scale, when change is happening, show them this graph. Because it's a general graph. It's like a kind of it isn't like a journey map, et cetera. It's sort of like how a human reacts. So change happens, and then your energy might valence high, because you're like, what is that? And so what happens is, you go high, and then you go low, because you're shocked. It's like, whoa, I'm not sure. And then you're like in denial. I don't know. And then you're like, well, maybe this could work out. Recognizing. And then you're like, no, I don't like this at all. You just changed something. I don't like that. And you end up at this bottom place, because anger is so powerful, and everyone joins up on the anger train. And everyone goes down with you. And then you're in this space of catharsis, and you can go one of two directions. One direction is a pretty sad place where you can never recover. You're stuck there, which is a real space for different people. Or you can like make your way up kind of gradually and kind of level off, not as good as in the past, but you recover. You accept it. There are some who, when change occurs, they enter what I call the #YesWeCan category. They're like, they can actually bounce back very quickly. They're very odd and interesting, but some can do that. Often fueled by a lot of privilege, a lot of grit also in different cases, but it's interesting space to be in, that top horizon. Okay. Now, I love this model of emotion. It's famous. It's the Ekman model. And Ekman charted 6 emotions: fear, surprise, disgust, sadness, enjoyment, and anger. Now, if anyone who loves pie charts, if you notice, the only good emotion is 1/6. Do you see that? It's like 1/6 of that whole wheel, right? It's like, holy cow, that's kind of depressing. He later extended the model to include more types of sub-emotions, but it's always stuck with me that this happy space, enjoyment space, is actually scarce when we think about life. Of course, if you're too happy too often, then it's not good too. We know that, but all right. I'm sharing all the models I collected for change. You can choose one. Don't you have to use all of them? But when I found all these, I was like, oh, different models. So this model is called the House of Change. It's European, and it's from the Swedes. It's called the Change House. Who knows the Change House? Some people know the Change House. Yeah, so not so common in North America, but Change House is about, clearly maybe an architect thought of this. So it isn't a graph. It's a set of rooms. You're in the room of contentment, and then you're in denial, and you're in confusion, room of renewal. So this is, and also I think architects have added all kind of rooms to this, because this sounds kind of quaint and easy, but it's much more exciting if you extend the house, like there's like a patio version, or like awesome space, or there's a dark cellar of despair. You look online, there's like 17 versions of this house. But it's good because some people can't think in terms of a graph. So which room are you in is a question to ask. Because if you know which room you're in, you know which doors to open. Last model. This is a model from Australia. It's called the 4 doors model. And I like this model because it's sort of good for a spreadsheet. Who loves spreadsheets? Come on, spreadsheets. Yeah, thank you. Spreadsheet's easy. So you make a spreadsheet with 4 columns. And the first column is, did you have this before? Did you still have it after? That's like, oh, that's a good door to go through. Nothing happened. Or you didn't have it before, and you don't have it after. Right? So these 2 doors are like, it's going to be OK. Then this door is the, I had it before, but I don't have it after. This is the let it go category. And then lastly, there is the didn't have before the thing, but now I've got it. This is the go for it door. So if you have a spreadsheet, list them out, all the 4, see which one has the most, whatever, and then you can feel happier or sadder based upon that. Following so far? Again, this is not a proper business presentation. This is an oversaturated set of information to share with you. Are we OK so far? OK, good. All right, OK. Now, all that aside, I've spent the last 2 years realizing, yes, there's all those models, but there are simple things you can know to be more peaceful in life. Happier, may I say, just sort of like more content, basically. Because it's easier to go through life if you know what you cannot change, is what I've felt in life. Because then you're like, wow, I can't do all that. Well, I don't have to worry about it anymore. So I'm going to give you 3 things you do not have to worry about at all that change our lives all the time. OK, first fact. There's this thing where the Earth goes around the sun. Can't change that, right? And based upon that, that determines a whole bunch of things. It determines the climate. It determines the weather. There's a false understanding that people think that the Earth is further from the sun and closer to the sun during the year. That's why it gets hotter and colder. It's actually not true. It's the axial rotation of the Earth around the orbit. It determines how much hotter you are versus cooler. And if played out over centuries, it determines which part of the Earth, which people have been more advantaged or disadvantaged, more privileged or less privileged. And so this is played out over centuries, of course, eons. No one can change this fact, right? You feel a little calmer? Maybe? Not yet? Okay, I did. Second fact, you cannot change that the moon goes around the Earth. Right? It does this, right? You can't do anything about that. And it does a lot of stuff, the moon. Like the moon, because the Earth has this thin layer around it, the water, it's like gravitating the water all over the place when it's doing its rotation. It is creating it is instigating the wave patterns on Earth. Can't change that so far. Number one, can't change Earth around the sun. Can't change moon around the Earth. The last one, I made an animation of the waves. Okay, the last one is the Earth has this molten core that's super hot. And this is a problem because it means we're an unstable core. So earthquakes or like, the zits on the Earth kind of thing, whatever, it's like, this is real stuff. This is what's happening because of this sort of instability. Add to that, we are on a spaceship traveling at 67 kilometers per hour. The surface is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, right? Cannot change any of that. So, but those three factors determine so much in our world. Okay, that's the important facts I wanted to leave you with in section 2, which once I began to ponder over, it may be sort of like, oh, okay, well, I guess can't do that. So, how do we adapt to change? We have beginner's mind, and we control what we can control is one of my micro sort of, I wouldn't call it a theory, but a feeling right now. And I've gathered my favorite 3 quotes. I don't know about you, but I use pithy quotes to stay focused. And the shorter they are, I love them because I can't remember long things. So to adapt, one of my favorite sayings is, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. That's like a good one, isn't it? That's Eric Shinseki. No one likes to be irrelevant. Beginner's mind. I found this in a book on vacation 20 years ago, written in pen. It read, I'd rather be green and growing like a tomato, a green tomato, instead of ripe and ready to rot. Right? That's nice. It's like green tomato gets to be red. Red tomato, gonna get spoiled. So beginner's mind has an advantage. And lastly, control. This is a Coveyism. You can't change everything around you, but you can always change yourself. So I use these 3 quotes sometimes in rotation in my mind to kind of help my own resilience. Perhaps 1 or 2 might be useful to you. Okay, how are we doing so far? Okay? We're on time? Good. Okay. Section 3, mattering and mortality. Now I'm going to go into more data I've uncovered to understand how we humans don't make it very long. So it's a bit dark. It's not meant to be dark, but it's reality, as we all know now, sadly. Okay, here we go. So I used to have a digital camera before there was like a smartphone. Digital camera, did you have one? So you had one too, right? They were big, and they were small, and they were too small, and suddenly they were on the phone. So like, it was fun taking pictures of stuff, right? So before Instagram, you can see everything in the world now. But I remember like walking around my house, and it was like, whoa, because Lord of the Rings had just come out. The little Gandalf thing, and like Gandalf the White, and whatever, and I was like, oh my gosh, white moth on black asphalt, sign of something. And so I lost the photo, but it's on Flickr. Everyone know Flickr? Old days Flickr, old school Flickr. So I found it on Flickr. But at the same time, I wrote something a bit dark called How Many Springs Do You Have Left? It's still running. It wrote in PHP. But basically, you enter your age, and it shows you in a black and white or color flower representing a spring you have left, how many springs you have left. And I like to check how many springs I have left on the average, and whoa, those springs are going away. But it helped me gain perspective because I had mentors who told me that I wasn't going to live forever and I should make a difference while I'm alive. So I look at this now and like, whoa, I remember there were so many colored flowers. less so now. And so I've been thinking about this for a while. And I'm so glad to be in the risk space. There's a person named Dr. David Hilson. He's the risk doctor. He has great YouTube videos. And he says this thing, risk is any uncertainty that matters. I think this is like the best definition of risk. Uncertainty. Let's break that down. Uncertainty, as he says, is what might happen. What might happen. Uncertainty. It's uncertain. Now, many of you may have heard Donald Rumsfeld, unknown, unknown. And I always scratch my head about that. What does that mean, unknown, unknown? So there are 4 permutations, unknown, known, unknown, unknown, an unknown known, and an unknown unknown. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's real. There are 4 permutations, so you know this, so you studied it. So first of all, unknown known is pretty easy. I call this, I know and I've got this, boss. It's like no thinking. There's unknown unknown, which isn't that interesting, but an unknown known is interesting. An unknown known means, I don't know, but someone out there does. So go find them. That's a really subtle one. It took me a while to figure that one out. The last one, an unknown unknown, is just direct. Huh? How did that happen? So an unknown unknown is truly unknown. But don't forget, there's like 3 variations of unknown in there. Okay. Uncertainty. And then something that matters is about a risk only matters if it matters to you. Like if something happens like in a different place and you have no connection to it, it doesn't actually matter. There is no risk there per se. But if it's something that you care about, the risk exists. And so oftentimes we think of like what we don't want to happen. So risk, when it's about what matters, you're going to lose something. But in the business world, we also have what you want to happen. Like, wouldn't it be great if my Series A company becomes Series B? Like, that's uncertain. Boy, that'd matter, right? So it's this difference between what you don't want to happen versus what you want to happen. And if you're in the financial sector, you know about how this is how you wake up every morning. You're battling those 2 variants. Okay. Now, this is data I pulled on how we die from natural hazards. Natural hazards are things that happen in nature. They are things like earthquakes, floods, etc. And this is a graph of deaths caused by natural hazards, which you can see are not breaking the million mark. If you look further back past 2000, there's the million plus club. Notice there is the H1N1 famous so-called Spanish flu. That's a picture of, you know how they have this cool coronavirus picture? They couldn't see it up so closely, but they did have a picture of H1N1, which didn't look so scary, I guess. But when you think about what we know is if you see, okay, that's interesting. Oh, wow, cued keyboards. 1 second. Okay, let's see if I press that. Good. 1 click. And then 1 click. Thank you for coming with me. And then 1 click. Okay, so if you notice this large spike, that's like breaking the million mark. And so the reason why the novel coronavirus is such a big deal, it hasn't been recent that we've experienced a million mortality natural event. However, we do have H1N1 famous Spanish flu, which is 50 million people died. And in comparison, this is lower so far. So good news for us, but bad news in general, of course. And the natural hazards, though, what we often don't talk about is the mental stress. So this is a list of how it impacts people who've survived. It's like fear, grief, anger, guilt, feeling depressed or sad, resentment. You know, it's like there are people who pass away, die, expire, and there's people in the edges and how we as humans experience that. And that's a real thing that no one's actually able to measure. And it's a really big deal. Okay, so that's natural hazards. Then we've got what's called human-made hazards. You know, we humans, we do stuff. Have you ever seen like Jackass the movie or whatever? Like, what? You know, we humans, we do crazy things, wild things. We do things and we're like, what? That's human. We also do terrible things to each other. So this is an interesting map if you haven't seen it before. It's the UCDP map of conflict data. And it shows, they have records back to the 1980s, and it shows armed conflict fatalities. It works on mobile if you want to look at it. It's pretty like, it's like, oh, I haven't seen this before. I wish I knew about it before. And it actually helps you understand what we humans do to each other. And the UN has a very clear definition of genocide that I was not aware of, but after reading it, it makes so much more sense because it is many variations of the bad that humans can do to other humans. And if you look at what the UCDB has recorded, 2.7 million deaths, again, caused by humans against humans. And this is just recording what is recordable, but there's so many aspects to how we humans, human-made hazards, differ from natural hazards. Some people argue that, of course, we humans are part of nature, therefore it's natural hazard, but it's good to be aware that we humans intentionally do these things which we want to reflect upon, right? Okay, so here's some good news. I said good question mark news. We're more likely to die from natural causes, different from natural hazard, human-made hazard. There's natural causes. You see this automobile where, you know, our brains are in this automobile of flesh and bones? It's not supposed to last that long. So it kind of wears out. You know, my mom is 85 years old, and she always says, like, something is hurting, something is bad, something is whatever. And we always joke and laugh and like, well, Mom, you know, your car is like, you know, it's a juggalugga is her word in a Hawaiian pidgin for like broken down car. And I'm a juggalugga, John, and like, juggaluggas are cool, Mom. But our body breaks down. And the number one cause of death globally is cardiovascular, the heart, the clock for our body, essentially, our CPU clock, cancer, lung-based issues, and of course, COVID has elevated category 3. And there's also something called accidental death. This is like, you know, how many of you have taken a fall? Who's fallen down before? Hard fall, right? It's super bad. Like I fell, concussion, broken this, took me 2 years to kind of recover. Dying from falling is quite common in the accidental health category. So everyone who like raise their hand, we made it, right? If you look at comparison, you see this blue part? Motor vehicle accidents, so you place it in context. And so it's actually, accidental death is actually a small portion of how we die globally. Okay. All right, so that's past the death data. Now I'm going to talk about this idea that I found online through Nidhi Ban. She's a PhD candidate now, famous design person herself. So there's mortality. Everyone knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that wonderful pyramid that people say is not correct, but I think it's fine enough pyramid. At the bottom, you have what I think is mortality. This is where you're dealing with like life or death. This is like really important. If you don't have that safety, who cares about the latest social media app, right? If you don't have like safety, you can't like do the other stuff. And then I think everything above that line fits into this mattering word, mattering. It's like I matter as a human being. I matter to others as a human being. It's where your psychological health comes into play. We talk a lot about our wellness. It's connected because once the body is going, then you get to have the wellness and the full thing works, right? So I'm doing an experiment where I watched this YouTube video from the London School of Economics, and it really changed me. The researcher found the people's regrets when they are dying. This is like the top 5 list. The first one reads, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Now, I'm going to sequence next, and I want you all to read what's on the screen together. Ready? Ready? It's good stuff, right? So it's like, okay, maybe one of you will take one of those. A moment together. Okay, if you know about positive psychology, Martin Seligman, he has a ABCD model that's, again, every model some people like, some people don't like. That's the whole moral of the story. Life is gray. You can choose, try out different things. He has a notion that when something adverse occurs, you want to say exactly what bad thing happened. And then you want to describe how you think that impacts you. And then you want to map out, like, and if I thought that, what's going to happen? What are the consequences? And then lastly, you want to ask yourself, does that make sense? Would that really happen? I like another variant is distract yourself. It's like, oh, forget about it. This is where shopping therapy comes into play. So again, ABCD, pretty easy model to use. Okay, we're totally on time. Business of resilience. So businesses have their own mortality issue as well, and also disease as well. And so that's why resilience is relevant to businesses, because they're always facing adversity. And I've been in this space, and I'm fascinated by now thinking of there's our own mortality, and there's organizational mortality, and there's echoes. And I haven't worked out completely how that works, but just in the raw. First of all, companies aren't lasting as long as they did. It's sort of a fact. If you're a company that your parents or grandparents worked at, it may be gone. And so that's just a fact. Companies last a much shorter time. And if you're hearing today about like supply chain because of COVID, there's this person named Yossi Shafii. He's an MIT guru of supply chain, a professor there. He has 3 books on resilience. They're fantastic. But my favorite passage is this one. He says, be risk-versed, not risk-averse. And this is in the supply chain world because you have to be super agile and nimble. So if you're risk-averse, you're too afraid to do anything. But in that world, you have to be risk-versed. What risks am I managing right now? So let me give an example how that works. So let's say, like before COVID, this idea of just-in-time inventory from the Toyota production system, lean manufacturing, no warehouses, use cheap shipping is the whole idea of modern global supply chain management. So the white dot is your factory, and the black dots are your suppliers, and they're low-cost suppliers. They're quote-unquote further away from you. They're cheaper. And the way you're able to get away with that is you have cheap shipping. And the shipping is so inexpensive that you can leverage this cheap supply and this cheap delivery. And this was really good because you can make a lot of profit. Contrast that with a different model that's more resilient, where you have your factory, same situation, the white dot. You might have a cheaper supplier further away, but you have a network of suppliers local to you that cost more, but you have a relationship with them. And you're able to access those when needed. And the reality, though, is that by having these redundant sources, you're more able to recover. But the problem with this model is it costs more money. And so the reason why supply chains have not been resilient is because the capitalistic sort of thinking requires you to think on the left side, efficiency, versus the right side, resilience. And so there's a wonderful business thinker, Roger L. Martin. He was the co-CEO of Monitor Group. It was a once popular consulting company. He also co-founded the term of design thinking. But he wrote a great book about efficiency versus resilience. And the problem is in management science, the goal is efficiency. You're rewarded for being more efficient, not for adding cost. So in the new management doctrine, enabling more companies to realize that it isn't a cost, it's an investment in being more agile, more resilient for a changing world. And when you map this out, when you map out the risk matrix, this is a risk matrix mechanism that I overdrew the graph. I apologize, because even I can't read it, so we're okay. So we have a likelihood, likely, unlikely, and consequences, light versus severe. So most companies focus on severe consequence, high likelihood, because that's just like smart. But Dr. Sheffy posits that companies have to focus on high consequence, low likelihood. This is the so-called negative black swan event. And he purports that there are so many negative black swan events that could occur to your business or organization that it's prudent to enter that quadrant, which most companies don't invest in. And the other component is a time-based behavior of how this can change. If you spend money to understand it 10 years ahead of time, you're more strategic. But again, it costs more to be more resilient. Also, you can pay for detectability. You can find out faster than your competitor what's happening. So let's focus on this detectability axis because it involves technology. So to detect something before it's occurring or while it's occurring or in high resolution, I guess in the DevOps world or SRE we call it observability. Knowing is a superpower, and that's about data. So the reason why we don't plan for anything is because we know all these bad things could happen. We just have so much more things top of mind. It's like who has like a dog? Do you have a dog? You have a dog? Dog. You care about your dog. And it's like if you want to spend all day long thinking about this or your dog, so we prioritize what we think about, right? And so, tune things out. I found this HBR issue in 2006. It was a special report on SARS and H5N1, so-called avian flu. And the key line that I loved in the article was, should a pandemic emerge, it would become the single greatest threat to business continuity and could remain so for up to 18 months. This is 2006. I find it interesting that this was not the cover article of HBR that month. The cover article was how to be a great number 2. That was more important than, right? So kind of interesting, right? But this is all the time. Any negative black swan can occur. It's not important until it occurs. Now, there's work by Martin Reeves of the Henderson Institute, acquired by BCG. And he has a great piece called All-Weather Companies. You know, like all-weather tires? So all-weather tires are good for all season, basically. So to be a company that can be an all-weather company, his team created data to show how an all-weather company performs better after something bad happens. Now let's get into when bad things happen. Who plans events? Plans events? Plans events. Yeah, plan events, right? The key thing to event planner is always before the event, during the event, and after the event. Everyone knows after the event does not give much love because you're so tired. But after event is important. So in the bad things happening world, after event gets the most press. Because there's before the event happens, there's during the event, and there's after the event. And the reason why when bad things happen, the after part gets the most play is because there's very little data to predict. The detectability axis is very weak. But that's in the past. Because of the fourth industrial revolution, we have so much more data. So that's changing right now. Now, let's give an example. I like to use cars as an example because they're a great analogy for a computer. You can replace any word about cars with computers, and it kind of fits if you shift us back 70 years. But if you think about it, cars have evolved with technology. And there's things like anti-lock braking. There's things like electronic stability control. And those come into play when you're during the thing. But there's a new breed of technologies. If you know about Tesla really kind of pushed into the foreground this idea of active safety versus passive safety. Active safety meaning real-time everything and prediction everything. And so what they managed to do is describe a world, you know about the full self-driving capability in Tesla. It's able to do before, during, and after in a symphonic way. It's achieving all-weather capability of a vehicle because it's using so much computation. So when you think about active safety for the world, I've spent the last year, it's amazing what data is out there. Who is like a cartography researcher, climate, whatever researcher? Yeah, I mean, it's like amazing how much. So go to flightradar24.com. You can go to marinetraffic.com. You can look at all the airplanes, look at all the boats. You can look at satellite imagery around the world with Worldview, NASA. You can look at firms, look at all the fires around the world. There's this windy.com. Oh, this is the best app ever. Actually, it's not just an app, it's in the browser too. It's like beautiful. And you can see weather patterns. And so there's so much data available now. There's also tons of mobile apps. And so if you can't pick this up later, I have a whole list of my favorite mobile apps for iOS. Just to be in touch with the world. The world stuff's happening. Scary, but interesting. And you can't change it, remember? You can't change the Earth going around the sun or the moon going around the Earth. You can't change the speed of our Earth, so it's okay. We're just riders. Okay. So now let's apply this to the business world, the space that I'm in. So the first wave of tools to be able to enable organizations to go through a bad event are mainly systems that are speculative because there was no computation, very little computation. But by being in this space, I'm aware of so many technologies that are available to go before, during, and after, so-called critical event management technology. And this is something I'll briefly touch upon, but it's made me think about how you can actually be an all-weather company. So, summary of section 4, on time. So, the basic idea of how businesses stay resilient is they have a notion of protecting themselves and adapting. They learn, and then now they're protecting better, and they're adapting. This is the entire business continuity, disaster management world. This is really important work and getting better. It's iterative. Okay. Technology, though, is changing the game. This is something that we were able to present at COP26. It's the realization that many businesses, once they've mastered protect and adapt, that wasn't their goal. Everyone loved outputs versus outcomes. The outcomes matter. The whole point of protect and adapt was one point, and that was to enable your organization to prosper. So you iterate, protect, adapt, so your organization can compete. And so this competition element, how can I use resilience technology to beat my competitors, we're going to see more of in the future. Okay, last section 5, home stretch, 11 minutes. Okay, so adversities are trending, right? And they are either exogenous, they happen to you, or they're endogenous, they come from within inside. Endogenous, your heart. Your heart doesn't last forever. Exogenous, you trip on the thing and you fall and you break your face, right? So that happens too. So either case. So every hazard has a time-based behavior. In many cases, I've heard this called bang or boom, but there's this notion that boom occurs, there's time before and time after. The event has a duration, T. I call it T, and it has a tau. And the tau is a decay. Think about COVID. We were hoping it would last maybe a month. But that T is super long, and the tau doesn't decay the way we want it to decay. There's before what happened, often called left of boom, and there's after it happened, called right of boom. And to feel the symphony and visually, it's the wave came in, bad things occurred, recovery occurred. That's a kind of a narrative of a bad thing. Now, this is the 6 types of natural hazards that occur on Earth. Biological, living things. Climatological, hot or cold, not to be confused with climate. Geophysical, land stuff. Hydrological stuff, water on land. Meteorological, this is air stuff. Lastly, extraterrestrial, my favorite. Often forgotten, because there's stuff out there, not the aliens, but there's like stuff out there that's not good when you enter it. Okay. Also, like solar flares affect electricity, and so there's all this amazing stuff that happens out there that affects Earth. And I highlight the 5 of these that are all impacted by climate change. So if you're wondering about climate change and its impact on the Earth, it's impacting the majority of natural hazards. So remember my emotion wheel, where happiness was 1/6? Climate change is impacting 90% of what we're experiencing as natural hazards. And again, natural hazards are bad. They can hurt you. And then there's human-made hazards. We can break them into things that have less accountability, accidents, oops. And the oops is like, something like a traffic accident, things like that, accidental fires. It happens. Accidents. No one's fault per se, just sort of like how it worked out. This other side of human accountability is interesting. There's international hazards, war, national local hazards, violence. There's assorted national local hazards. And so I pulled out the taxonomies that seem to make sense when you look at this data later. Industrial hazards. And all of these are impacted by the change in the climate as well. So if you're wondering, like, climate change, what's it impacting? Natural hazards and human-made hazards as well. And there's an entire generation of invisible hazards. David Bowie? David Bowie lovers? Come on, David Bowie, yes. My gosh, what an amazing person, a true alien. In 1999, he was interviewed by the BBC about the internet, and you have to watch this video. If you're in tech, you have to watch the video. He nails what the internet was going to become. And he said, it's an alien life form, and it's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about. He described, and this was the inspiration for the book that I wrote, because I was trying to understand what is digital transformation. So if you aren't aware of the alien life form that's crushing us, this is my primer to try to help you understand that, because it helped me. Okay, so we're coming to the end. This is so good. Well, anyways, and thank you for staying. I appreciate this. I can sense you, and I can detect if it's ridiculous or not. So in 2019, I presented a design and tech report here about different trends in products. And one was defense versus offense. And I didn't know what I was thinking about at the time, but years later, it makes so much more sense. Because we have so many defensive technologies, but I thought there should be more offensive technologies. And now, years later, I realized I was looking for ways to fight. Because flight, as a default, didn't seem resilient. What can we do with that? So 3 years later, I'm in this resilience tech space where I know all these bad things about the world, people, things that happen. And I'm now tracking all of this. And so I hope over the next months to come, you'll see my attempt to kind of sort that world. And I want to add, though, that we use this word resilience. It can also be used negatively. There's a study in HBR from 2017 about how to tell people be resilient doesn't let you bring your whole self to work also, too. It's like, suck it up or whatever. It's like, you should do it. Like, that's the way I was kind of thing, whatever. So it's important to understand the flip side of resilience is actually not that great, too. So temper how you use resilience in the workplace. And inclusive design is a topic that I covered in past reports. And I now realize that the inclusive design movement is a way to enable businesses, to enable people to bring their whole selves to work and actually expand their TAMs, their total addressable markets. And so it's a positive thing, but acknowledging that too much resilience means I can't bring my whole self to work. I can explain how I hurt, because that could not only impact whether I want to stay, but the business should change because of how I think. Okay, summary. So this is a closest concentration I've been able to find to explain resilience. You ready? Okay, this is the last slide. Number one, diversify views and governance. What this means is that if you're trying to be resilient, have lots of different kind of people get involved. And if you're going to like govern it in bands, layers. That way it's resilient. With one breaks, others come to play. The other thing, noise occurs because you're over diverse, and so you have to isolate the signal. So you have to because you're accepting more noise, you now have to consciously isolate it. Not light bulb, laser beam. And then you have to realize that resilience, remember mattering? You matter because you matter to someone else. Like my mom, every time I've stumbled, I call her up and she says, I believe in you, John. And oh my gosh, it heals everything, right? I believe in you because I matter to her. So mattering is about this symbiosis, this thing we have with other people. It's not about you. It's about you in regards to everybody else. And partnerships, in business at least, you have to incentivize those. It's called skin in the game. Nassim Taleb talks about this, the Black Swan author. And lastly, exercise, practice all over, practice all the time. You know the famous 10,000 hour thing. You got to practice this. You can't just put it on a shelf and hope it's going to work out. Okay, this is a message from our sponsor, the Earth. This is illustrations I commissioned from Tony Ruth. Years ago, I thought climate change might matter, so now it's all kind of come together, and instead of a dark illustration, but that's Tony's work. And I asked Cabelli to do 2 versions of resilience. This is a pure black letter version, and these are all open source available. They're all hand-drawn. It's so gorgeous. I could never do that. And this is the ammogram that's available online. Okay, 2 minutes and 55 seconds. And there's all these questions. Okay, there's all these technical questions. Let me take a picture of this. Can I get questions later so I can put them on my blog later? Yeah. Okay, 2 minutes, 40 seconds, back to your life. Thank you, everyone. Be safe. All right.